The threshold station stretched across the void of space like a city made of metal and light. And every species in the known galaxy passed through its massive halls at least once in their lifetime. For this was the gateway to the aligned territories. The only path to civilization for those who wished to trade, travel, or seek refuge among the stars. Grace Miller stood in line with hundreds of other beings, her hands clasped behind her back in a stance that felt natural after 12 years of military service. And beside her, Daniel Porter shifted nervously from foot to foot, his eyes darting between the towering aliens that surrounded them on all sides. "Try to relax," Grace said quietly, her voice calm and steady. "Easy for you to say," Daniel whispered back. "You spent years in combat zones, but this is my first time off Earth. And everything here wants to eat us or step on us or both." Grace allowed herself a small smile, for she understood his fear, but she also knew that showing weakness in a place like this would only invite trouble. And trouble was something humanity could not afford on its first official diplomatic mission to the galactic community. The line moved forward slowly, and Grace observed the processing procedure with careful attention, noting how each alien stepped through a tall archway that scanned their bodies and displayed information on floating screens above their heads, including their species, homeworld, and threat classification. Most beings received green or yellow classifications, marking them as safe or requiring minor monitoring. And occasionally, a being would receive an orange classification that brought guards closer with weapons ready. But the line continued moving without major incident. "What do you think we will get?" Daniel asked. "I have no idea," Grace admitted. "Earth has never been classified before. So we are about to find out what the galaxy thinks of us." The minutes passed slowly, and finally, Grace reached the front of the line, where a Kovani official with 4 arms and skin like polished bronze gestured for her to step forward with obvious impatience. "Name and world of origin," the official demanded. "Grace Miller." "Earth, Sol System." The official paused, his multiple eyes blinking in confusion, and he checked his datapad before looking back at her with renewed interest. "Earth," he repeated slowly. "You are one of the new species, the ones from the quarantine zone. We prefer to think of it as home." Grace replied evenly. The official made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been disgust, and he waved her toward the scanning archway with one of his 4 hands. "Step through and we will see what the system makes of you." Earthling, Grace walked forward without hesitation, her boots clicking against the metal floor, and she passed through the archway as countless others had done before her, expecting nothing more than a routine scan and a simple classification. But the archway did not give her a green light. It did not give her yellow or orange either. Instead, the entire archway flashed deep red, and an alarm tone echoed through the processing hall, a sound that made every alien in the vicinity freeze in place, their conversations dying instantly as all eyes turned toward the small human woman standing beneath the crimson glow above her head. The floating display showed 2 words in glowing red text that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Earthborn category unknown. What is happening?" Daniel called out, pushing forward through the crowd. The Kovani official stumbled backward, his 4 arms raised defensively, and his earlier arrogance had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. "Impossible," he stammered. "The system cannot classify her. The readings are beyond our parameters." More officials rushed forward, their voices overlapping in a dozen different languages, and Grace stood perfectly still as they surrounded her, their instruments pointed at her like weapons, their faces twisted with confusion and growing alarm. Her gravity tolerance is off the scale, one shouted. "Radiation resistance exceeds all known species," another added. "Atmospheric adaptability suggests she can breathe in conditions that would kill a Geos." Valkyrian seconds, Grace said nothing. for she did not understand what all the fuss was about, since she was simply a human, no different from the 8 billion others living on Earth. And she had never considered herself special in any way. A tall figure in gleaming silver armor pushed through the crowd, and the other aliens parted before him like water before a ship, their heads bowing in automatic deference. And Grace found herself looking up at a being that stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scales covering his body and eyes that burned like molten gold. "I am Commander Raxus of the Draveth Warrior caste," he announced, his voice booming through the hall, "and I demand to know why this creature has triggered our highest alert protocols." The Corvani official, who Grace now realized was called Pralite Sithis based on the nameplate on his uniform, hurried forward with his datapad clutched tightly. "Commander, the system has flagged her homeworld as a Category 12 environment." Raxus went very still, and for a moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "That is impossible," he said slowly. "Category 12 worlds cannot support life. They are death traps, hellscapes of gravity and radiation and predators. And yet she stands before us," Sithis replied, his voice trembling, alive and apparently healthy. A native of such a world, Raxus turned his burning gaze upon Grace, and she met his stare without flinching, her brown eyes steady against his golden ones. And something passed between them in that moment, a silent measuring of strength and will. "You expect me to believe that this small, soft, unarmored female is dangerous?" Raxus demanded, gesturing at Grace with one massive clawed hand. "She has no scales, no claws, no natural weapons of any kind. And she is barely taller than a Velfari child. The system does not lie," Sithis insisted weakly. "Then the system is broken," Raxus declared. "And I will prove it." He stepped closer to Grace, looming over her like a mountain of muscle and armor, and his hand moved to the ceremonial blade at his hip, a weapon forged from metals that could cut through starship hulls. Daniel shouted something and tried to push forward, but 2 guards grabbed him and held him back, and Grace remained exactly where she was, her eyes never leaving the massive warrior before her. "What are you doing?" Sithis asked frantically. "She is a diplomatic representative. You cannot simply attack her." "I am not going to attack her," Raxus said with a cold smile. "I am going to test her, for if she is truly from a death world, then she should have no trouble with a simple display of force." He drew his blade, and the metal sang as it cleared the sheath, gleaming under the station lights with an edge that could split atoms. "Commander, I must protest," Sithis began, but Raxus was already moving, his blade sweeping toward Grace in a strike meant to test her reflexes, meant to see if this so-called Earthborn would flinch or flee or freeze like prey before a predator. Grace did none of those things. She simply watched the blade come, her expression unchanged, her body relaxed, her eyes tracking the weapon with perfect calm as it descended toward her throat. The blade descended through the air with deadly precision, and every alien in the processing hall expected to see the small human woman crumble before the might of Commander Raxus. For no species in recorded history had ever stood against a Draveth warrior and survived, but Grace Miller was not like any species they had ever encountered in the heartbeat before the blade reached her throat. Her hand moved, and it moved so fast that Raxus did not even see it happen. For one moment, the blade was falling, and the next moment it had stopped completely, caught between Grace's index finger and middle finger as easily as someone might catch a falling leaf. The silence that followed was absolute. Raxus stood frozen, his golden eyes wide with shock, his arms still extended in the striking position, and he stared at his blade as if he had never seen it before, unable to comprehend what his senses were telling him. "That is not possible," he whispered. Grace looked up at him with an expression of mild curiosity, her fingers holding the blade steady without any visible effort. And when she spoke, her voice was calm and conversational. "On my world, we have a saying," she said. Never start a fight you cannot finish? Raxus growled and tried to pull his blade free, his massive muscles straining with the effort. But the weapon did not move even a fraction of an inch, held in place by two human fingers as if they were made of solid steel. "What are you?" he demanded. "I told you." Grace replied simply. "I am from Earth." She released the blade without warning, and Raxus stumbled backward, thrown off balance by his own strength, and he nearly fell before catching himself against a nearby pillar, his chest heaving with exertion and his eyes never leaving the human woman who had done the impossible. The crowd erupted into chaos. Aliens fled in every direction, their screams echoing through the vast hall as they trampled over each other in their desperation to escape. And the Velthari guards raised their weapons with shaking hands, their training forgotten in the face of something they could not explain. Prahlad Sithis pressed himself against the wall, his forearms wrapped around his body as if trying to make himself smaller, and his voice came out as a terrified squeak. "Contain her. Someone contain her." Daniel Porter pushed free from the guards who had been holding him, for they had released him in their panic, and he ran to Grace's side with his heart pounding in his chest. "Grace, what just happened? How did you do that?" Grace glanced at him and shrugged, a gesture so casual that it seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. "I caught a blade," she said. "It was not moving that fast." "Not moving that fast?" Daniel repeated incredulously. "That was a Dravath combat strike. Their warriors can cut through armor plating with those blades." "Then I suppose human reaction time is faster than armor plating." Raxus approached slowly, his blade now sheathed at his side, and his earlier arrogance had been replaced by something else entirely. Something that looked like respect, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. "How?" he asked. Simply. Grace considered the question for a moment before answering, and when she spoke, she chose her words carefully, for she understood that this moment would define how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations to come. "Earth is what you would call a death world," she began. "Our gravity is stronger than most inhabited planets, which means every human grows up carrying extra weight with every step we take. And our muscles and bones grow dense and powerful just from walking around." Raxus listened intently, his golden eyes burning with intensity. "Our world has radiation levels that would poison most species within days," Grace continued. "But we evolved under that radiation, and our cells learned to repair themselves faster than the damage could accumulate, making us resistant to conditions that would kill others." "And your reflexes?" Raxus asked. "How do you explain those?" Grace smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Earth has predators, Commander. Thousands of species that evolved alongside us with claws and teeth and venom. And they hunted us for millions of years before we learned to hunt them back. So we developed the ability to react faster than thought, to move before our conscious minds even registered danger." She stepped closer to Raxus, and despite his size and his weapons and his reputation, he found himself fighting the urge to step back. Every human alive today is descended from ancestors who survived those predators. Grace said quietly, "The slow ones died, the weak ones died, and only the fast and the strong passed on their genes, generation after generation, until we became what we are now." Prahlad Sithis had recovered enough courage to approach, though he kept a careful distance from Grace. "This is why Earth was quarantined," he said, his voice still unsteady. "The Council discovered your world centuries ago and immediately declared it forbidden, for they knew that any species that could survive such conditions would be dangerous beyond measure." "Then why are we here now?" Daniel asked. "Why did you finally allow us to send a delegation?" Sithis hesitated, glancing at Raxus as if seeking permission, and the warrior nodded slowly. "Because we have no choice," Sithis admitted. "The aligned territories face a threat that we cannot defeat alone. An enemy that has already destroyed 17 worlds and shows no signs of stopping. What enemy? Grace asked before Sithis could answer. A new voice echoed through the hall. Deep and ancient and filled with authority. That is a discussion best held in private. Grace turned to see an elderly figure descending from an observation deck high above the processing hall, riding a platform of hovering light that lowered him gently to the floor. And she recognized the species immediately from the briefing files. She had studied on the journey here. The being was a Silurian, one of the oldest and wisest species in the galaxy. And the robes he wore marked him as someone of tremendous importance. "I am High Chancellor Morth," he announced, "leader of the Aligned Council and the one responsible for ending Earth's quarantine. And I believe you and I have much to discuss." Grace Miller of Earth. Grace studied him carefully, noting the way the other aliens bowed and scraped before him, noting the calculating intelligence behind his aged eyes. And she understood that this moment had been planned long before she ever set foot on the threshold. "You have been watching us," she said. "Watching me, waiting to see what I would do when threatened." Morth smiled. And it was a smile that held secrets older than human civilization. "You are perceptive as well as dangerous," he said. "That is good, for the enemy we face will require both qualities in abundance. And I need to know if humanity possesses what we need to survive. And what exactly do you need from us?" Morth gestured toward a doorway that led deeper into the station. "Come with me, and I will show you why the galaxy is dying, and why Earth may be our only hope." Grace looked at Daniel, then at Raxus, then back at the ancient chancellor who held the fate of countless worlds in his withered hands. "Lead the way," she said. The chancellor's private chambers were unlike anything Grace had ever seen, for the walls themselves seemed to be made of living light that shifted and pulsed with colors that had no names in any human language. And the furniture floated above the floor on invisible currents of energy that hummed softly in the recycled air. Grace stood at the center of the room with Daniel at her side, and behind them, Commander Raxus had followed uninvited, his presence tolerated but clearly unwelcome by the ancient Silurian, who settled into a hovering chair with the slow movements of someone who had seen too many centuries pass. "Before I explain our situation," Morth began, "I must ask you something. Grace Miller, and I require an honest answer. Ask your question. When Commander Raxus attacked you, were you afraid?" Grace considered the question carefully, for she sensed that her answer mattered more than she understood. "No," she finally said. "I was not afraid, because I knew I could stop him. And if you had been wrong, if his blade had been faster than your reflexes, then I would have died. But I was not wrong, so I did not die. And that is the only outcome that matters." Morth leaned back in his chair, and something that might have been satisfaction crossed his ancient features. "That is precisely the attitude we need," he said softly. "For the enemy we face does not understand fear, and only those who have conquered it within themselves can hope to stand against the Hollow." "The Hollow," Daniel repeated. "You mentioned that name before. What exactly is it?" Morth waved one hand, and the walls of the chamber transformed, the living light reshaping itself into a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that stretched from floor to ceiling, with countless stars glowing like fireflies in the darkness. "The aligned territories span nearly a quarter of this galaxy," Morth explained. 17,000 inhabited worlds, 400 sentient species, all united under a single council for mutual protection and prosperity. He pointed toward the outer edge of the map, where a vast region of space had been marked in deep black. "And that is the Hollow." Grace studied the black zone carefully, noting how it seemed to pulse and expand even as she watched, creeping steadily toward the glowing stars of the aligned territories, like a disease spreading through healthy tissue. "It looks like it is growing," she observed. "Because it is," Morth confirmed grimly. The Hollow is not a place. It is an entity. A machine intelligence of unimaginable scale that emerged from beyond the galactic rim 2 centuries ago. And it has one purpose: to consume. Consume what? Everything. The map shifted again, zooming in on a solar system at the edge of the black zone. And Grace watched in horror as the Hollow swept through it like a wave of darkness, stripping planets to their cores and converting their mass into more of itself, more machines, more hunger, more nothing. 17 worlds have fallen to the Hollow in the past century alone, Morath continued. Each one was evacuated if possible, abandoned if not. And in every case, the result was the same: total annihilation followed by assimilation into the Hollow's ever-expanding network. How do you fight something like that? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We have tried everything. Raxus spoke up from behind them, his voice heavy with frustration and grief. The Draveth have sent our finest warriors against the Hollow's machines, and we have achieved nothing but casualties. For every soldier we lose becomes raw material for more enemies. Morath nodded sadly. Our weapons are ineffective. Our strategies fail. Our greatest minds cannot find a weakness to exploit. And with each passing year, the Hollow grows stronger while we grow weaker. Grace felt the pieces falling into place in her mind, and she could not like the picture they formed. That is why you contacted Earth, she said. You need soldiers. Soldiers from a death world who can survive conditions that would kill your own warriors. Yes, Morath admitted without shame. You want us to fight your war for you. To throw human lives against this machine intelligence. Because we are expendable in ways your own people are not. I would not phrase it so harshly. But yes, that is essentially correct. Grace felt a cold anger building in her chest. But she kept her voice steady and her expression neutral. And if we refuse? If humanity decides that we have no interest in dying for a galaxy that quarantined us for centuries and only reached out when it needed cannon fodder? Morath's expression did not change, but something flickered in his ancient eyes. Something that might have been guilt or might have been calculation. Then I fear we would have no choice but to take more direct action. Meaning? Meaning that Earth would be conscripted whether it agreed or not. Your population drafted into service through whatever means necessary. Because the survival of 400 species and 17,000 worlds outweighs the autonomy of a single planet. Daniel made a sound of outrage. But Grace silenced him with a raised hand. You would enslave us, she said flatly. I would do whatever is necessary to prevent the extinction of everything I have sworn to protect, Morath replied. And I am not proud of that fact, but I will not apologize for it either. Grace looked at the ancient Silurian for a long moment, reading the truth in his tired eyes, and she understood that he was not lying, that he truly would sacrifice humanity if he believed it would save his people. But she also understood something else, something that Morath had not considered. You are afraid of us, she said quietly. Morath blinked in surprise. I beg your pardon? That is why you are being so honest, why you are admitting your plans instead of manipulating us with promises and deceptions. Because you know that if you tried to deceive us and we discovered the truth, we would become an enemy far more dangerous than the Hollow could ever be. The silence that followed stretched for several seconds before Raxus broke it with a low, rumbling laugh. She sees through you, Chancellor, just as she saw through my blade. And I find myself wondering if perhaps we should fear the humans more than we fear the machines. Morath did not laugh, did not smile, did not react in any visible way. You are correct, he finally said. The Council debated for decades before deciding to contact Earth, and many argued that awakening humanity to the wider galaxy was too great a risk, that your species should be left in ignorance until the Hollow consumed us all, rather than potentially creating a second existential threat. What changed their minds? I did, Morath said simply. because I believe that humans are not the monsters some fear. And I believe that if we treat you with respect and honesty, you will choose to help us willingly." He leaned forward in his chair, his ancient eyes fixed on Grace with desperate intensity. "I am gambling everything on that belief. Grace Miller of Earth, so please tell me, was I right to do so?" Before Grace could answer, an alarm began to wail throughout the station, a sound that made even Marath's composure crack with fear. "What is happening?" Daniel Demondraxis checked the device on his wrist, and his scaled face went pale. "A hollow probe," he said. "It has bypassed our outer defenses and is approaching the station at combat speed." "That is impossible," Marath protested. "We are in the heart of aligned space. The hollow has never penetrated this far before." "Impossible or not, it is happening," Raxus growled. "And we have perhaps 10 minutes before it reaches us." Grace looked at the Chancellor, at the warrior, at the young translator who had trusted her to keep him safe. And she made her decision in an instant. "Show me where it will breach the hull," she said, "and I will show you what Earth sends to war." The medical bay of the Threshold Station was overwhelmed with wounded, and Grace sat on a treatment table while an automated system cleaned and sealed the dozens of cuts and gashes that covered her body. And she watched through the window as teams of workers began the long process of repairing the damage caused by the hollow assault. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face pale but his eyes bright with relief. "I heard what you did," he said. "Everyone heard. The entire station is talking about nothing else. I did what needed to be done. You killed over 100 hollow machines, Grace, by yourself, and you saved thousands of lives in the process." Grace shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her freshly sealed wounds. "They were just machines, Daniel. No different from any other enemy I have faced, just bigger and made of metal instead of flesh." Daniel shook his head in disbelief, but before he could respond, Chancellor Morath entered the medical bay, followed by Commander Raxus and a small entourage of officials from various species. The Chancellor looked older than he had just hours before, as if the weight of what he had witnessed had aged him in ways that time alone could not achieve. "Grace Miller," he began formally, "on behalf of the Aligned Council and the 400 species we represent, I offer you our deepest gratitude for your actions today." "I do not want gratitude," Grace replied. "I want answers." Marath raised an eyebrow. "Answers? You told me earlier that the Council would conscript Earth by force if we refused to help you fight the Hollow. But now I want to know if that threat still stands, because I need to know who I am dealing with before I can decide how humanity should respond." The officials behind Morath exchanged nervous glances, but the Chancellor himself remained calm. The threat was real. He admitted, "The Council had authorized me to take whatever measures necessary to secure Earth's cooperation. And now?" Morath was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was heavy with something that sounded like shame. "Now, I understand that such measures would have been catastrophic. Not because they would have failed, but because they would have succeeded, and we would have created an enemy far more dangerous than the Hollow could ever be." He stepped closer to Grace, his ancient eyes meeting hers with something that looked like respect. "You are not just soldiers," he said softly. "You are not just weapons to be pointed at our enemies. You are a people, a civilization, a species that has survived horrors that would have destroyed any other in the galaxy, and you deserve to be treated as such." "Pretty words," Grace said, "but I need more than words." "Then I will give you deeds," Morath replied. "As of this moment, I am formally withdrawing the Council's authorization for forced conscription. Earth will be invited to join the aligned territories as a full member with all rights and privileges that entails, and humanity's participation in the war against the Hollow will be entirely voluntary. And if we choose not to participate, then we will respect your decision, even if it means our eventual destruction." Grace studied the Chancellor carefully, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that his words were nothing more than a ploy to secure her cooperation through manipulation. She found none. Why the change of heart? She asked. Morath smiled sadly. Because I watched you fight today, and I saw something that terrified me more than the Hollow ever could. I saw what humanity is capable of when it is threatened, when it is cornered, when it has no choice but to fight or die. He shook his head slowly. If we had tried to enslave your people, you would have turned that fury against us, and we would have burned every world, every species. Every trace of our civilization would have been erased by a force we were foolish enough to awaken. Raxus stepped forward, his massive form still bearing the marks of battle. The Chancellor speaks truth, he said. I have been a warrior for 3 centuries, and I have never felt fear until today, never truly understood what it meant to face something that could not be stopped. He dropped to one knee before Grace, his head bowed in the ancient Dravith gesture of ultimate respect. You have my blade, Earthborn, he declared. From this day until my last, I am yours to command. Stand up, Grace said. Firmly. Raxus looked up in confusion. You do not want my service? Humanity does not need servants, Grace replied. We need allies, partners, equals who stand beside us rather than kneel before us, because that is how we survived our world. Not through domination, but through cooperation. She extended her hand toward the Dravith warrior. So stand up, Commander Raxus, and take my hand as a friend. Raxus stared at her offered hand for a moment, then slowly rose to his feet and clasped it in his own massive grip. Friends, he said, testing the word as if it were foreign to his tongue. Friends. Grace confirmed. Chancellor Morath watched the exchange with something approaching wonder. Is this how humans resolve conflicts? He asked. With handshakes and declarations of friendship? Sometimes, Grace admitted. Other times we resolve them with violence. And you really do not want to see us do that. She released Raxus's hand and turned to face Morath directly. I cannot speak for all of humanity. Chancellor, I am just one woman, one soldier, one representative of a species that is about to learn it is not alone in the universe. Then what can you offer? Grace smiled, and for the first time since she had arrived on the threshold, the smile reached her eyes. I can offer you a message to send back to Earth. A message telling them what we face and what is at stake, and I can promise you that when my people understand the situation, they will respond. How can you be so certain? Because that is who we are, Grace said simply. When we see someone in trouble, we help. When we see injustice, we fight. When we see a threat to innocent lives, we throw ourselves into the fire without hesitation. Because that is what it means to be human. She gestured toward the window, toward the workers and soldiers and civilians who were rebuilding the station, healing the wounded, mourning the dead. You want to know what Earth sends to war, Chancellor? We send everything, every resource, every soldier, every ounce of strength and courage and stubborn determination we possess, because when humanity commits to something, we do not stop until it is finished. Morath nodded slowly. Then let us hope that commitment will be enough. It will be, Grace assured him. The Hollow does not know what it has awakened, but it will learn, and when it does, it will regret ever. Coming near our galaxy, she walked to the communication terminal on the wall and began composing a message to Earth. To the governments and the militaries and the 8 billion people who were about to discover that their universe was much larger and much more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Dear Earth, she spoke aloud as she typed. They know what we are now. Send the others. It is time for the galaxy to meet humanity. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Hollow continued its endless march toward the aligned territories, unaware that its greatest enemy was not the aging empires it sought to consume, but a small blue world called Earth that bred monsters disguised as angels. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be. The station shook violently as the hollow probe slammed into the outer hull, and Grace sprinted through corridors filled with screaming civilians and panicking guards. Her legs carrying her faster than any of the aliens had ever seen a being move on foot. Raxus ran beside her, his longer stride barely keeping pace. And his earlier pride had been completely replaced by grim determination. "The breach point is in Sector 7, he shouted over the wailing alarms. "It is a cargo bay, large enough for a significant hostile force to deploy. How many machines can we expect?" Grace asked, unknown, but holoprobes typically carry between 50 and 200 combat units, each one designed to kill efficiently and harvest biological material for conversion. Lovely. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a squad of Velthari guards running in the opposite direction. Their weapons clutched to their chests as they fled from whatever horror awaited in Sector 7. "Cowards," Raxus snarled. "They are not cowards," Grace said. "They are simply outmatched, and there is no shame in recognizing when you cannot win a fight. Then why are we running toward it instead of away?" Grace glanced at him with a look that made the Dravith warrior's blood run cold. "Because I have not yet decided that we cannot win." They burst through the final doorway into Sector 7, and Grace stopped short at the sight that greeted her. The cargo bay was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium, and the far wall had been torn open like paper, with jagged metal edges glowing red from the heat of forced entry. And through that wound in the station's hull poured the nightmares of 1,000 worlds. The hollow machines came in every shape and size, some crawling on dozens of legs like massive insects, others floating through the air on silent propulsion systems, and still others walking upright on two limbs in a grotesque mockery of humanoid form. But they all shared certain features: bodies of gleaming black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, weapons built directly into their frames, and a complete absence of anything resembling mercy or hesitation. "There must be 100 of them," Raxus breathed. 117, Grace corrected automatically, her eyes scanning the enemy forces with the trained precision of a veteran soldier, plus more coming through the breach every few seconds. A squad of Dravith warriors had already engaged the machines near the breach point, their blades flashing and their war cries echoing through the bay. But even as Grace watched, she saw 3 of them fall, their bodies torn apart by weapons that moved faster than the eye could follow. "We need to seal that breach," she said. "If we can stop more from entering, we might have a chance." "The breach is too large for our portable shields," Raxus replied. "We would need to reach the manual override panel on the far side of the bay. But that means cutting through the entire enemy force." Grace assessed the distance, calculated the odds, and made her decision. "Then that is what we do." She moved before Raxus could respond, launching herself into the massive machines with a speed that defied everything he thought he knew about humanoid biology. The first hollow construct fell before it even registered her presence, its central processing unit crushed by a punch that shattered alloys designed to withstand starship weapons. The second and third fell in rapid succession, torn apart by hands that moved like blur of flesh and fury. Grace was not fighting like a trained soldier anymore. She was fighting like what she truly was: a predator from a world that bred killers. The machines adapted quickly, their networked intelligence recognizing the threat she posed and redirecting forces to contain her. But Grace adapted faster, her body moving on instincts honed by millions of years of evolutionary pressure, dodging attacks before they were fully launched, striking weak points that the machines did not even know they possessed. Rax followed in her wake, his blade carving through any construct that survived her initial assault. And he found himself laughing despite the horror of the situation, laughing at the sheer impossible glory of watching a single human woman tear through an army of machines like they were made of paper. "How is she doing this?" shouted a surviving Dravith warrior who had fallen in beside them. "She is Earthborn," Raxus replied. And for the first time since he had learned that word, he understood what it truly meant. They reached the center of the cargo bay, surrounded on all sides by hollow constructs that pressed closer with every passing second. And Grace paused for just a moment to catch her breath. Her uniform was torn in a dozen places, and dark blood seeped from wounds on her arms and face. But her eyes were clear and her stance was steady. "The override panel is 20 meters ahead," Raxus said. "But there are at least 30 machines between us and the wall." Grace nodded and wiped blood from her eyes. "Then we go through them." She charged again, and Raxus charged with her, and together they carved a path of destruction through the heart of the hollow forces. Two warriors from different worlds, united by a common enemy and a shared refusal to accept defeat. The machines fought back with increasing desperation, their weapons firing constantly, their blades slashing and their claws tearing. And for everyone that fell, two more seemed to take its place. But Grace did not stop. She could not stop, because somewhere behind her, Daniel was helping evacuate civilians, and somewhere above her, Chancellor Morith was watching to see if humanity was worth saving, and somewhere far away, Earth was waiting to learn if its children would be welcomed into the galaxy or dragged into it in chains. She fought for all of them. She fought because that was what humans did. They reached the wall, and Grace slammed her palm against the override panel. And for one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the emergency shields activated, sealing the breach with a wall of energy that cut off the flow of reinforcements and trapped the remaining machines inside the cargo bay with their worst nightmare. "Now we finish this." Grace said the battle that followed would become legend among the aligned species, a story told in whispers and songs for generations to come. For the remaining hollow constructs outnumbered the surviving defenders by nearly 4-1. But numbers meant nothing against the fury of an Earthborn warrior who had decided that today was not the day she would die. Grace fought until her hands were raw and her muscles screamed for rest. She fought until the last machine fell, and when it was over, when the cargo bay was silent, except for the groaning of damaged metal and the heavy breathing of exhausted survivors, Grace stood alone in the center of the carnage, surrounded by the broken bodies of enemies that had terrorized the galaxy for 200 years. Raxus approached her slowly, his own body battered and bleeding, his blade chipped and dulled from overuse. "I have never seen anything like that," he said quietly. "In 300 years of warfare, I have never witnessed anything even close to what you just did." Grace looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death and yet still held no regret. "I told you," she said. "On Earth, I am average." Above them, in the observation gallery that overlooked the cargo bay, Chancellor Morith stood with tears streaming down his ancient face. He had watched the entire battle. He had seen the truth of humanity with his own eyes, and he finally understood that he had been right to believe in them.